Which heaven's joys so bright and sun, heart of my heart, whatever befall, still be my vision, O ruler of all.
Hello, and welcome back to our study of the second epistle to the Church of God at Corinth. In our last study together, you'll remember that we covered some background information that will help us in our understanding of this epistle. First of all, we observed that Corinth is a part of Achaia. It's actually the capital city, and sometimes it's described as the chief city. And for good reason, we observed that as we thought about it, because Corinth is just slightly south of the Isthmus of Corinth, which is a 4-mile wide little neck of land that they used to avoid losing ships as they traveled loaded around the lower part of Greece. That isthmus is the reason that Corinth had so many people come there. We did observe that, of course, the city has 3 basic groups of folks who are the dominant population: the Romans, the Greeks, and the Jews. Now, people from the rest of the world came there as well. We understand that, but these were the 3 dominant population groups in that city. Paul introduced himself in this letter as an apostle of Jesus Christ. We're going to understand a little bit better why he did that as we go into the letter and see that even yet there are people who are challenging his apostleship. And he wants it to be known, I got to be an apostle because Jesus sent me. Very, very important. And then we talked briefly about Timothy. We observed that he was there at the beginnings of the Church of God at Corinth, that he and Silas came just a little bit after Paul had arrived there, and they all worked together for about 1.5 years in that place. Tremendous response was had for the gospel, and a good work was begun. Paul introduced his letter with these facts, that he's an apostle and also that Timothy is with him. He directed it to the Church of God at Corinth, as well as all the saints in all of Achaia. And we observed that that's much broader than the group that was written to, at least as far as is written down in the beginnings of the first Corinthian epistle. He extended to them a great greeting, grace and peace from God the Father and our Lord Jesus Christ. Now we're going to go on with what Paul next wrote, but before we do, I hope you'll pay close attention to this announcement.
The Gospel Broadcasting Network offers a free, non-denominational Bible course. Why not contact us for lesson number 1? Our mailing address is Gospel Broadcasting Network, 8900 Germantown Road, Olive Branch, Mississippi, 38654. You may prefer to enroll by email. The address is info@gbntv.org. To enroll by phone, call us toll-free at 888-805-3390. We'd love to hear from you.
So in the 3rd verse of the 1st chapter of this second epistle to the Corinthians, the apostle writes something very interesting about God. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and God of all comfort. Blessed. We might use a different word. We probably would say praise. Praise God, who is the source of mercy and comfort. Think about what the psalmist wrote, Psalm chapter 86, verse 15. When he thought about God, he said much the same thing that Paul is saying there. Let's look at that together. Psalm 86, verse 15. Listen to what he wrote in that place as he wrote about God. But you, O Lord, are a God full of compassion and gracious, long-suffering, and abundant in mercy and truth. You know, Paul was a great student of the Old Testament. I mean, after all, he was a Hebrew of Hebrews, as he described himself, brought up a Pharisee at the feet of Gamaliel. So he was well educated. He understood the Old Testament. So when he describes God as the God of all comfort and the God of mercy, he understands that that's exactly the way that God described himself through the singer of Israel, as we observed at least in this one passage. And truthfully, we could see it in a number of other passages as well. But then Paul goes on to say, who comforts us in all our tribulation, that we may be able to comfort those who are in any trouble with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God. Now, I have to tell you, I like what J.W. McGarvey and William Pendleton wrote in their book on this book of 2 Corinthians. They said, Paul regarded affliction as a school wherein one who is comforted of God is thereby instructed and fitted to become a dispenser of comfort to others. That's an interesting way to think about it. And that is exactly what the Apostle Paul is saying. God is the God of all comfort. And he says he comforts all of us. He includes himself, and with good reason. He comforts us in our affliction, in our tribulation, which is the word that is actually used there, tribulation. It is the idea of being squeezed, like squeezing the juice out of a grape. And that's a rather startling image when you think about it. But that's exactly the kind of thing that Paul and sometimes we have to endure. Listen to what he said in the 1 Corinthian epistle in the last chapter, chapter 16. We're going to start at verse 5 and listen to what he talked about. Now, I will come to you when I pass through Macedonia, for I am passing through Macedonia. And it may be that I will remain or even spend the winter with you, that you may send me on my journey wherever I go. For I do not wish to see you now on the way, but I hope to stay a while with you if the Lord permits. But I will tarry in Ephesus until Pentecost, for a great and effective door has opened to me, and there are many adversaries. And if Timothy comes, see that he may be with you without fear, for he does the work of the Lord as I also do. Well, at the end of that letter, Paul makes it very clear that the work in Ephesus was a great work, but it was a very dangerous work. You may remember how that in that city the people were riled up by the silversmiths, we call it union, guild is what they called it. They were riled up, and for 2 hours they shouted out, "Great is Diana of the Ephesians," over and over and over again. The silversmiths felt like that their occupation was about to be dealt a severe blow because Paul did not preach that Diana was the god that should be worshiped. Instead, he talked about the God of heaven. But even though it was a dangerous situation, God kept him there for a period of time, protected him. He comforted him, secured him, gave him strength. This almost describes an underpinning. And that's a great way to think about it. That when we go through difficult times, that God underpins us. He supports us so that we can make it through the difficult times. And of course, Paul made it through, and he was so thankful for that. Now, originally, Paul's plan had been to come directly to Corinth, drop by, go on his way further, and then come back again. Now, at the end of the first epistle, he's saying, I've changed my plans. I'm not going to come by right now. Now, it's apparent, as we will see later in the 2 Corinthian epistle, that Paul is giving them time to change. You ever have your mother call out to you and say something like this, "Don't make me come in there," and then she waits a little while to give you time to correct whatever it is that she's talking about before she comes in? Well, that's pretty much what Paul did in reference to the church at Corinth. He said, "I'm not coming right now." And he's giving them time so that they can correct things. Instead, he's going to come on his way to Judea. Remember, there's a great contribution that is being taken up for the needy saints in Judea. There's a great time of struggle and trial there, a famine. And the brethren all over that part of the world are giving so that their needs of the Christians in Jerusalem can be met. And Paul says, "I'm going to come to you on the way, and I may even stay the winter with you so that you can send me on my way the rest of my journey in good form." So Paul writes to them about affliction, tribulation, and with good reason. We've seen what that was all about. He says that he was comforted, that God underpinned him, strengthened him. Why, Paul? So that he in turn could strengthen other people. You know, I have discovered that the best way to learn to do something new is to find someone that knows how to do it and get them to show me the way. I've learned several things that way. I really didn't know anything about construction. I mean, even the most basic things about construction. But then I got to work with a fellow in Mobile named Harry Miller. And Harry would first show me what I was going to be doing, and then he would get down and demonstrate how it was to be done, and then he would watch as I did it. Well, so that I now would be ready to teach other people. Well, that's exactly what Paul is saying about himself. He's saying God is the God of all comfort. He comforts us in our tribulations, our affliction, if you would. And that is so that we in turn can comfort other people. And that's exactly what Paul did. He comforted other people. And we'll see more about that as we go on through not just this book, but also we'll be able to see it as we look at other letters that the Apostle Paul wrote. You know, Jesus endured tribulation, affliction, when he was on the earth. Just think about how many problems that the Jews created for him, how many times his life was threatened before he actually, of course, was put to death on the cross of Calvary. We Christians need to realize that we too will endure difficult times. Turn over to the book of 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 13, where the Apostle Peter tells us, "But rejoice to the extent that you partake of Christ's sufferings, that when His glory is revealed, you may also be glad with exceeding joy." Rejoice as you endure sufferings. Well, one might well say, why would I want to do that? Well, one of the reasons is because it demonstrates I'm really with Christ. Well, that's what He went through. And if I'm going through suffering because of standing up for Christ, then I'm on His side, clearly. And that ought to be viewed as a great thing, a good thing. That's exactly how Paul portrays it, and of course, how Peter portrays it for us. Those two fellows understood what it was to go through difficult times. Well, he goes on then, beginning in verse 5 of 2 Corinthians chapter 1, and he says, "For us the sufferings of Christ abound in us." For as the sufferings of Christ abound in us, so our consolation also abounds through Christ. So he says, as suffering grows, so does God's support. So does His encouragement grow in our lives. And that's a great reassurance that we have there. We have consolation in Him. Really, this is that same word that had already been translated comfort. You know, English teachers and translators follow basically the same pattern. They don't like to use the same word over and over again, and so they'll use synonyms. Well, that works pretty well until we're trying to pick up on the fact that there is a distinct flow here, that this whole section is about the comfort of God. He is the God of all comfort. He comforts us in our afflictions, and as our afflictions grow, so does His comfort grow. And that's what verse 5 lets us know very plainly, and it's very important that we see that. In fact, it abounds through Christ, and you can envision something overflowing. You know, somebody is pouring your milk at the breakfast table, and they get talked to by somebody else. They look away, and the milk just spills out on the table, just overflowing the bowl. That's the way God's comfort does. It overflows toward us as troubles arise or get stronger in our lives. So in verse 6, he says, "Now, if we are afflicted, it is for your consolation and salvation, which is effective for enduring the same sufferings which we also suffer. Or if we are comforted, it is for your consolation and salvation." Paul's got a beautiful way of reframing things. You know what that means, don't you? You look at something and you see the good in it instead of emphasizing the bad. And Paul does a very, very good job of that. He could have bemoaned the fact that he had to go through suffering. He could have cried about all the trials that he went through. But instead of doing that, he said, look, God lets me go through this so that when you go through it, you'll know that that is just a part of being a Christian and God's looking out for you. It's going to be all right. And then he goes on to demonstrate it even more fully. He says, when God comforts me, it also is to let you know that you have comfort and salvation. So both our suffering and our comfort ought to cause us to realize that we have salvation where? Well, it's in Christ, of course. And that's what Paul has been talking about. It is significant that he keeps talking about this word comfort. G. Campbell Morgan, in a little book that he wrote about 2 Corinthians, says concerning comfort, literally it means strengthened, sustained. This is more than consolation. It is underpinning. It is coming to the side of someone and disannulling his loneliness and his difficulty. Comfort. Now, I find it most interesting that in the book of John chapter 16, that Jesus describes both Himself and the Holy Spirit as comforters. He said that if I go away, I'm going to send another comforter, another of the same type. And the word that he uses there is a very, very interesting word. It's a word that literally means to call to one's side, parakaleo. And maybe we ought to write that down so that you know what we're talking about here. In the original, it's parakaleo. Not important that you remember that, but you may want to understand that this is basically our word, parallel, and kaleo literally means I call. So I call you parallel to me, or God calls you parallel to Him. The Holy Spirit calls you parallel to Him. Jesus calls you parallel to Him. Over and over and over again, that idea is there. Now you might say, well, I don't understand, and I can appreciate that problem. And so here's what I would suggest to all of us as we think about this. Think about a little boy playing Little League Baseball. By the way, it could be a little girl as well. I've had some great girl players on my teams through the years. But just imagine now that it's the bottom of the last inning. I think in Little League that's the 6th inning. That the home team is down by 1 run. The bases are loaded, but there are 2 outs. And now the little guy or the little girl comes up to bat and they strike out. You know what's going to happen next. Everybody on the visitor's side is going to be jumping up and down and oh so excited, high-fiving each other. We won the game. Everybody on the home team side is going to be kind of down in the mouth. They're going to be sad. They're going to be disconsolate. The teams will line up and they go to shake hands with one another, but now let's look back to that child that just struck out. And you can just about imagine what it would look like. They drop their bat into the dirt and they drag it behind them with their head hanging down. It's then that a good coach goes right up beside them and says, "Come here just a minute. Let me tell you something. It's going to be all right. They got you today, but you'll get them next time." That is the idea of parakaleo. That's the idea of comfort. God sees us in our suffering, and when He sees us in our suffering, He calls us to His side, and He takes care of us. And Paul wanted the Corinthian Christians to know that, and in fact all the saints in Achaia to understand it, because suffering was surely going to come. After all, they were followers of Christ. So verse 7 of 2 Corinthians chapter 1, he goes on to say, "And our hope for you is steadfast, because we know that as you are partakers of the sufferings, so also you will partake of the consolation." Paul rejoiced, not in the fact that they would suffer, but instead in the fact that they would be consoled or comforted by God. That is a great reassurance. Any of us who've ever had our children go off, even somewhere like to summer camp, I think we feel better when we know that some adult that the child knows and loves is going to be there. Maybe it's a dear friend, maybe it's an aunt or an uncle or a grandma or grandpa. They're going to be at camp. What happens if the child gets hurt? Well, you know as well as I do. They're going to run to that person they know. And that person that they know will take them in their arms and they'll say, "Okay, what's the problem?" And they'll examine it and they'll reassure them and they'll comfort them. That's the idea. Paul anticipates, yes, trouble is coming for the church, but don't give up. I'm thankful, Paul says, because I know that God is going to give you as much consolation as you have a measure of tribulation or affliction, suffering. Now, verse 8, Paul continues, "For we do not want you to be ignorant, brethren, of our trouble which came to us in Asia, that we were burdened beyond measure, above strength, so that we despaired even of life." Now, we've already looked a little bit at that trouble. The little word we have here that we didn't see in the book of Acts is that Paul was afraid he was even going to lose his life. It was that bad. But the good news, it didn't happen that way. In fact, listen to him as he continues, because he really lays it out in even stronger terms first. "Yes, we had the sentence of death in ourselves, that we should not trust in ourselves, but in God, who raises the dead, who delivered us from so great a death, and does deliver us, in whom we trust that He will still deliver us." So Paul says, I had a sentence of death. He thought he was going to die in Ephesus. And boy, when you think about that shouting crowd, it was an angry mob. It was a mob out of control. In fact, if you go back and look at it in the book of Acts, it's interesting that the town clerk stepped up and And he told them, this is an unlawful assembly. We're not allowed to be here like this. And we need to break this up. Everybody needs to go to their home until we can have a lawful assembly. He even told them where that would be. He said, if Demetrius and the others really have a charge against Paul and those who are with him, then the courts are available. Let them go to court. Let them have a legal assembly. But Paul, in the midst of this great 2-hour-long riot that was going on, feared for his life. The good news is that God delivered him. And the truth even goes beyond that, because he goes on to say, not just that he did deliver, but he will still deliver us. You know, you see much that same attitude at the end of the second letter that was written to Timothy, 2 Timothy chapter 4, where Paul said, at my first offense, nobody stood with me except the Lord. The Lord stood with me and he delivered me. And he said, and he will deliver me. Now that's an interesting comment, because in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, Paul has said he's already dying. He's being poured out like a drink offering. His death is imminent. He knows that because he's fought a good fight, he's finished his course, he's kept the faith, that he will receive a crown of righteousness. But he also knows that his death is right around the corner. And yet he says, what? The Lord delivered me the first time and he will this time. It's evident that he is not thinking about that he's going to live. Not in this life. Instead, he's thinking about he's going to deliver me in the hereafter. I'm going to be with him in eternity. And so even here in this 2 Corinthian epistle, he places his confidence and his trust in God, and he urges the brethren to do the same. He goes right from talking about how God is going to deliver him into verse 11 of 2 Corinthians 1, saying this, you also helping together in prayer for us, that thanks may be given by many persons on our behalf for the gift granted to us through the many. I like that idea. God's going to deliver me. And a part of the reason that he's going to deliver Paul is because the brethren are praying for him. And when God delivers him, then thanksgiving is going to abound. Everybody's going to give thanks for the good that took place in the life of the Apostle Paul. This letter opens up with such beautiful ideas. It clearly talks to us about the God of all comfort, a God who comforts us whenever we go through trouble and trial. He does that so that we in turn can learn how to comfort others. Yes, Paul feared for his life. Yes, Paul went through difficult times, but God delivered him. And he was confident that God would deliver him again. Why? In part because the Corinthian brethren worked with God by praying for him that he would be delivered, and everyone could give thanks.
Still